Morning, everyone, and welcome to the second of our series of webinars, which are hosted by CCUK and the Global Cosmetics Cluster. And this is part of the Access to Global Markets series. Our first webinar covered the actual market and the landscape of the market. The second part, which we're going to deal with today, is around regulations and more practical information. Except my screen won't move. Oh, here we go. So first of all, just a quick look at the programme. My name is Jane Evison and I'm a director of Cosmetic Cluster, and so I'm doing the introduction. Then we'll go on to Amanda Isom from Bloom Regulatory, who will cover the regulatory framework in the UK. Then Dr. Moderesi, who will cover the responsible person. And we will finish off with Daniel Bateson from DAXA, who is going to talk about the logistics side of importing. Then we'll finish off with a Q&A, which will be where anyone can ask questions either in the chat or by email to our panelists. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available through our channels after today. So if you're not familiar with the Global Cosmetics Cluster, it's a network of clusters worldwide with bases in Asia, Europe, and the US or North America. And the aim is to promote sharing of information and support businesses, particularly SMEs, in the countries where the clusters are located, to encourage innovation and business development. And there are 15 members currently. The Cosmetics Cluster UK has been a member for several years now as one of the founder members, and we also sit on the board of the Global Cluster. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Amanda, who's going to talk about the regulatory picture.
Thank you, Jane. Just share my screen. Excellent. Hi, everyone. So welcome. Thank you for joining today. A little bit about me and the company that I work for. So my name is Amanda Isom. I am the Regulatory Affairs Director at Bloom Regulatory. We are a consultancy based in the UK, located in London. We specialise in using our extensive knowledge of cosmetic legislation and also other relevant regulations to support businesses with their compliance, so labels, formula, notification, etc. But also we specialise a lot in regulatory strategy, so looking at borderline product advice, packaging requirements, REACH compliance, and looking at strategy for upcoming regulatory changes such as fragrance allergens and packaging. So I'm here today to explain the basics of the regulatory framework for, I'm going to say UK, but you'll also already see on this slide that I've headed it GB, Cosmetics Regulation. And the reason for that is that when we left the EU in 2020, whilst we took the cosmetics regulation with us, we took it into England, Scotland and Wales. So our legislation under Great Britain is specific to those territories, and Northern Ireland still stays for the purposes of compliance as part of the EU. So I may occasionally refer to UK accidentally, but when I'm talking about the regulation, I'm talking GB. So alongside that main base text from the EU, we have the product safety and metrology regulations, which were what put everything into place and made some minor amendments in 2020 in order to allow us to be independent of the EU regulation, and also the cosmetic products enforcement regulations. So altogether, that legislation makes up our requirements in Great Britain, and we have a guidance document also available from the government on that. So under that legislation, we have some key principles which give us the compliance for cosmetic products. We have the roles and responsibilities, safety, ingredient restrictions. We have product information and cosmetic product safety reports, and then requirements for labeling and claims, and then notifying the product. And then once the product is launched, monitoring for adverse reactions. So we're going to take a quick look at each of those, just in brief today, obviously, because it's just a short session, but just to give you those highlight requirements. So first of all, just briefly touch on responsible person, which Mojan is going to follow with a much more in-depth look at. But just really to remind you that you cannot place a product on the GB market without having, and this one is intentionally marked as UK, a UK responsible person. So what does that mean? It means that you must have a local entity who is fully responsible under the legislation for the compliance of that cosmetic product on the market. And the key points really to note at this point in time is that they must be established in the UK. So of course they've got to be located here, and they must have access to the product information file. And as I said, Mojan's going to talk in much more detail about that. But those are the key takeaways really on that aspect. Moving on to the aspect of safety, there is an overarching principle really of the whole regulation that means putting a safe product on the market. But when we talk about the specific safety clause, the Article 3 safety, it focuses on reminding us that the product must be safe for human health, and that is under normal or reasonably foreseeable conditions of use. So we're not talking about misuse of a product, but that product must be safe if it's a reasonably foreseeable use that the consumer would have used the product for that use in that way. But the one thing I wanted to highlight in addition to that is the aspect of food imitation, and that it is also the responsibility of the responsible person to make sure that the product isn't going to be deemed to be an imitation of a food product when it is not suitable to be eaten. There is a particular focus in the UK on small parts that might choke. So I've given you one example down here on the right-hand side of cupcakes. So one of the things that's particularly been picked up in the UK is when there are small plastic decorations on top, for example. That's been a particular issue here. So next is ingredient controls. So when we left the EU, we took with us the annexes from the EU regulation, and that meant that we have the prohibited list of substances, which is Annex 2, a list of restricted substances in Annex 3, so anything that's on that list, you can only use it in the way that it's set out. So for example, fluoride. And then 3 positive lists as well. So in Annexes 4, 5, and 6, we have lists of colorants, preservatives, and UV filters. So if you're including an ingredient for one of those functions, it absolutely must be on the list to be able to use that substance. For colorants and preservatives, it's the function of what it's doing sort of within the product. So perhaps it's just colouring the product. Of course, that will transfer across to the consumer as well, perhaps, and how they're using it if it's a makeup product. But preservatives, it's very much about protecting the product. So it must be on that positive list if it's going to be preserving the product. Whereas UV filters, this is a slightly different list. The positive list is there for UV filters that are going to protect the consumer. So if you're popping something into the formula just to protect the product, so maybe a nail polish where you don't want it to fade in the bottle, that doesn't have to be on that positive list. But if you're offering SPF, UVA protection, then it needs to be on that positive list. And then we have Article 15, which is slightly separated then from the annexes. where we have a prohibition on substances which are classified as carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reprotoxic. But what we do have normally is that those are also listed in Annex 2 to make it a little bit clearer for everyone to be able to track those substances and make sure that they're not used unless they are specifically allowed to be continued for use. So moving on to product information file and safety reports. Product information file is made up of 5 sections under the regulation. So a product description, a safety report, a method of manufacture, and also GMP evidence, proof of effect, and animal testing data. But really the main part of a product information file is the cosmetic products safety report, or CPSR. And that is an evaluation of the formula of the product by looking at all of the individual ingredients and components that are in that formulation. So we are looking at microbial quality, any characteristics and specifications of the individual materials, how the product's going to be used by the consumer. So with that, how much of the product are they going to use each day or in each application? And of course, what does that mean then as to how much of each ingredient they are exposed to on a daily basis? And then with the knowledge of the toxicological profile or also sensitization aspects of the individual ingredients, the safety assessor can then make an assessment of whether they consider that formula to be safe for use by the target consumer. And then also we'll be monitoring any adverse reactions and keeping that information update, maybe updating our safety assessor if we have information that is coming through. And then once we have all of that evaluation done, the safety assessor produces a conclusion, which of course we hope is that the product is safe, and recommends any warnings and instructions for use that need to be included on the labelling in the UK. Next, if we just consider the labelling, so there are particulars that have to be included according to the regulation. And I've given you a mocked up label here of some basic information. So we have a product function that must be included on there. So if that's perhaps obvious from the presentation of your product, often, for example, a lipstick is very obvious from the way it's presented, then you may not need to spell that out. But for example, here I have a hand cream. Of course, it's in a tube. Lots of products come in tubes that might look quite similar. So we need to pop on there the function so that everyone knows what that is. For imported products, we need to include a country of origin and also the net content, so the quantity of the product in the packaging. Our ingredient list we've adopted the glossary names that came from the EU, so also using those within our labelling. And then the warnings, if we have any, like I was mentioning in the safety report. And then our UK responsible person name and address, which again, Morgan's going to mention in her presentation. And then if we have a period after opening or best before date by which the product needs to be used, then that needs to be on the labelling. And then finally, a batch code to enable the traceability of the product, and of course recall if that is deemed necessary at any point. So the other thing I wanted to note, of course, is that this is all labelling on the packaging. We don't have any facility to have digital labelling in the UK at the moment. In terms of where you place that information, all information needs to be on both the primary and secondary if you have 2 layers of packaging, except the ingredients, which can just be on the secondary outer packaging. But it must be indelible, easily legible and visible. So of course, indelible meaning permanently affixed. In terms of the sizing that you use, there's nothing specifically stated except for the net content and referring to the weights of measures regulation there for minimum size of font, and that everything must be in English. So you can have other languages on there, but the information must be available in English. In terms of claims, we have specific requirement under the cosmetics legislation coming under Article 20. And alongside that, we have a complementary regulation, which again we took from the EU, the common criteria and the associated guidelines. So essentially what that means is we don't have a positive or negative list of claims that we can use, but we have fundamental criteria that we must abide by when we make claims about the cosmetic product. Legal compliance, truthfulness, evidential support, honesty, fairness, and informed decision making. Sorry. So very common sense principles, but what that means in practice is, for example, something like paraben free might be considered to be against the fairness criteria because other people are using those permitted ingredients and you are potentially denigrating that. And not tested on animals. Everyone is required to not test on animals. So strictly speaking, that may be considered to fall foul of the legal compliance criteria because you are merely claiming legal compliance of your product. And then in terms of notification, we have a dedicated portal in the UK where you need to notify products prior to placing them on the market. That includes name of the product, category of the product, so for example, makeup, information about the formula, so that might be your exact formula, concentration ranges, or perhaps what we call a frame formula. Any nanomaterials need to be identified and potentially some additional information uploaded and a copy of the label as well. And then finally, cosmetovigilance, so monitoring any adverse reactions that happen to the product with the product after it's been launched. We have two definitions, undesirable effect and serious undesirable effect. And the importance of that is because of what you have to do with that information. So you will be recording all of that information within your product information file, and of course monitoring it in case that anything that you're receiving in that information suggests that you may need to take corrective action on your product. But for serious undesirable effects, they must be reported to the competent authority within 30 days of receipt of that complaint from the consumer. So just to summarise and recap then, so we have the fundamental principles of the UK cosmetics regulation, very similar to those that are in place in the EU, and we took those from that legislation. Compliance is mandatory for all products. It is before placing the product on the market that you must ensure that you comply. It is for every product, whether that is sold or given away free of charge. And that also includes professional products, not just those that you are supplying through retail. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. That was a really clear description of the UK regulations. Thank you very much. We now go to Dr. Medaresi. I believe that she is in this meeting, but she's having problems with the internet. So we do have a recording which we're going to play. And then if anybody does have any questions, she can be available in the Q&A panel. So Jill is doing the honours.
It is an honor to be here and have the opportunity to share over a decade of experience of being the responsible person.
We've lost the sound, Jill.
provide a wraparound care around our clients. And we have a team of in-house UK and EU registered toxicologists, safety assessors, and also regulatory experts. We are also part of a bigger family of registered group that can provide the global cosmetic support for you. So during this slides and presentation, I'm going to take you through the concept of responsible person, what is the roles and what are the responsibilities, and how to choose the right path. Let's have a look at what happened before and after Brexit. Prior to Brexit, UK and EU, they were considered as one jurisdiction. So if you wanted to place your product on the EU and UK market, you only need to have one responsible person. However, after Brexit, things gets a little bit complicated. So what happened is we have GB, which is Great Britain, we have Scotland, Wales, and England. We have Northern Ireland based on the Windsor framework. And if you want to place your product on the market, on the GB market, you have to have one responsible person being placed in the GB with traceable address. And if your products go to Northern Ireland market, you also to have followed the EU regulation. So for placing your product on the Northern Ireland, you have to have the EU and UK responsible person, or you have to have a responsible person based in Northern Ireland. And for placing your product on GB, you have to have a responsible person being placed in either Scotland, Wales, or England. So based on the UK regulation or UKCR, there are 4 important elements when you are placing your product on the market. The first step is basically appointing a responsible person. That responsible person, or in short, as we call it, RP, has got the ultimate responsibility to look after your product. The address of the responsible person and the name will be on the label. They have to notify your product on the UK portal. They kind of put together something which is called product information file, which includes cosmetic product safety assessment, and the qualification of the safety assessor should actually be equivalent with acceptable qualifications in the UK. And of course, after placing the product on the market, the responsibility of cosmetic vigilance. So who or what can be a responsible person? That responsible person can be a person or a company with traceable address in Great Britain or Northern Ireland. So there is no specific qualification in the regulation for the responsible person. You don't necessarily need to have a qualification. However, I'm taking you through that responsible person roles and responsibility, and I will leave you to be the judge that who can actually, you trust to protect your brand on the market. That responsible person address is going to be on your label. So we hear from some importers that they allocate a friend or family and they use the personal address on the brand. Is it allowed? Yes, it is allowed, but I will leave it to you to be the judge if you want to use a personal address on the label. And of course, the point of the contact would be the person of the responsible person, the authorities, and they have the ultimate responsibility for safety of the products, claims, and post-market surveillance. I would love to take you through the dynamic between the brand, importer, and distributor when you place your product on the market. Basically, if you're a brand and importing your product to Great Britain, you have an importer. That importer can be an external importer, or it can be the brand who imports the product. Legally, that importer naturally is considered as a responsible person. However, that importer can delegate the responsibility to an external person or a company who can be the responsible person for the brand. And that delegation happens through something which is called mandate. So between the external responsible person and the importer, you have something which is called mandate, and mandate should be in writing, and it is different with the commercial agreement that a brand and responsible person, they have together. So this is another infographic which kind of show you the relationship between brand, UK importer, and the UK importer. has got a mandate with the responsible person, with an external responsible person, and that external responsible person can have a commercial actually contract and T&C with the brand. So that responsible person, as you may see from this slide, they have a large list of responsibility. So based on Article 5, we have the obligation of the RP. Based on Article 6, there are some obligation for distributor and how the relationship between the distributor and responsible person should be. We have Article 10 that kind of define what the safety assessment should have, and the safety assessor should have the qualification acceptable in Great Britain. And also, putting the product information file together, notification of the product, labeling, claims. And we have Article 21, which talk about the access of information to the public. And of course, post-market surveillance, which is about communication of undesirable effect and serious undesirable effect with authorities. So all of these roles and responsibility under these articles are actually on responsible person's shoulders. So as you may see, responsible person is not just a traceable address, and it cannot be just an address on your label. It is very important that you choose your responsible person wisely with the right information and the right knowledge to make sure to protect your brand, to make sure your brand are compliant and can actually help you through the difficult time of cosmetovigilance. So after you place your product on the market, let's talk about a little bit post-market surveillance, or as we call it, cosmetovigilance. It is very normal when the product is being used by a larger population of people, you may get some allergy reactions, like, spot, blister, rash, hair loss. All of those are considered as undesirable effect. The responsible person should do something we call causality assessment. So should provide the form for the consumer who has kind of reported these issues. And causality assessment is basically analyzing the probability that the cosmetic product used by the consumer is responsible for that, undesirable effect. Because in many cases, some of these undesirable effects that are reported by consumers may not be related to your product. So the responsible person should be able to do causality assessment. And of course, if the undesirable effect is related to your product, and if it is considered and classified under serious undesirable effect, the responsible person should do the communication with the authority. There is a limited of time that they have to kind of report the serious undesirable effect based on the specific form and communication process. The other thing that I would like to kind of, take your attention here is about the claims on your label. We have seen that some people on the market, they say, okay, you're a responsible person, but, we don't support you for claims, or we don't advise you for your claims. I would like to tell you that responsibility of claims is under the responsible person. So the responsible person should have the knowledge to communicate with brands and tell them about what substantiations are required for the claims that they have on the label. And it is very important part of the requirement. Obviously, claims in GB are regulated under Article 20. There are 6 common criteria that I'm not going to go in depth about them, but there is a regulation for claims, and you have to make sure anything on your label, including logos, are properly substantiated. So remember, quality of your safety assessor and quality of your safety assessment reports are very important. You have to have a diligent person appointed as the responsible person. And that responsible person should have the ability to communicate with the authority, to make sure to know the regulation and care for your brand. So responsible person is not just an address, and notification on the UK portal is not registration. It doesn't mean that your product, if it is notified, it means that it is compliant with the UK regulation. So notification basically is telling the authority who is your responsible person, and that responsible person should ensure your products are safe and compliant to be placed on the market. Thank you very much for attention. Definitely get in touch with us if you have any question. We would be happy to support you for any of your requirements for responsible person. We are part of a bigger family of Register Corp, and we can actually support you for global cosmetic compliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the virtual Mojan. And obviously we've got the real Mojan here as well. We'll wait till the end, Mojan, when there is a time for questions, but just to let people know, thank you very much for that presentation. That was really helpful. And we'll see you in the Q&A after the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So our next speaker this morning is going to be Daniel Bateson from the transport and logistics company DAXA. Unfortunately, he's not going to be present, even he is present virtually, but not in person. So we're playing a recording from him, and I'm hoping that Jill is going to be able to share his presentation with you now. We will send him any questions afterwards, and he apologizes for not being able to be with us this morning. So it looks like we're going to, here we go. Hopefully this is all going to work.
Thank you to the CC UK for inviting DAXA and myself to join this webinar. And thank you very much for the introduction. I apologise that I can't be with you in person today. DAXA are a global transport and logistics organisation. We have over 40,000 employees globally and have an annual turnover of €60 billion. As part of our commitment to the cosmetics industry, we have been a member of the CC UK for almost 1 year. I work specifically within the European Logistics division of DAXA, where we have a number of what we term industry solutions. I'm responsible for the cosmetics logistics and chem logistics industry solutions for DAXA UK and Ireland. Today, I'm talking about some of the things that you should consider from a practical aspect when shipping products to the UK. I'd like to start by highlighting some key figures which demonstrate the importance of the UK in the cosmetics industry. Looking first at a global level, we see that Europe is the second largest economy for cosmetics, spending a massive €88 billion annually. As we focus in on the EU, we see here that the UK is in fact the fourth largest market across the European Union. Because of this, DAXA has developed the DAXA Cosmetics Industry Solution, where we support the cosmetics industry with bespoke transport solutions and industry expertise. I'm going to share a little bit of this with you in the coming slides. So moving freight is as simple as 1, 2, 3, or is it? The short answer is yes, providing that you select the correct transport partner for your products. I'm going to share some top-level information about things to consider when choosing your lead logistics service provider, including the collection, how freight is moved, for example, through a network, through to the delivery, and of course, some of the elements to consider in between, such as customs, which is reasonably new to most of the EU since the UK left the single market, but not for the rest of the world. I will also talk about freight packaging, transport security, and sustainability. So the collection, the network, and the delivery are the three fundamental parts to moving any consignment. The incumbent will need to have a collection network, a delivery network, and then there's the bit in between, so how the collection and the delivery network are connected. We'll start by looking at the collection. Once a shipment has been booked, it's going to be done through an EDI, by an email, or through use of the incumbent's booking portal. At DAXA, we call this e-logistics. The freight needs to be collected and consolidated at a defined location. In the case of DAXA, across our entire network, collections are handled by the corresponding DAXA branch. Here you see, for example, DAXA Germany, which is home to our head office in the beautiful Aargau region of Bavaria. You can see that we have over 40 branches across our full hazardous compliant network. In fact, in Germany, none of our customers are more than 100 kilometers away from a DAXA branch, which makes collections super, super easy. When the consignment is being collected, it's really important that it's able to seamlessly transit to the UK. This is where your incumbent's global network needs to be considered. Connectivity between continents and being able to track your shipment through the maze of connections are vitally important here. On this slide, you see DAXA's global network. We connect all of the blue dots, which are DAXA locations, through what we call interlocking. This is the integration of all modes of transport, including air, sea, and road, through one simple platform, DAXA e-Logistics. Once your freight has moved through whichever network and arrives into the UK, your incumbent will need to be able to deliver your consignment as per the agreed transit schedule. This is how DAXA looks in the UK, with our 4 main branches covering the southwest via DAXA Bristol, the southeast including London via DAXA Dartford, the Midlands via DAXA Northampton, and the north via DAXA Rochdale. We use an agent in Scotland here at Drum. But we do have direct lines from all of the world and the rest of the world into the UK. At DAXA, all branches are set up in the same way, albeit of varying sizes, as part of our standardised approach to logistics. Here you see DAXA Northampton, which is the regional head office for DAXA UK and Ireland. This building here is the transit terminal, our main cross dock. Here freight is received from around the world. Simply put, freight arrives in one side and leaves through the other once it's been processed for delivery or onward ship. DAXA Northampton is also home to our 3 contract logistics warehouses where we store and offer inventory management for our clients' products. This activity takes place here in Unit 2 and also here in Unit 3 as well. You can see on the slide some of the key figures across DAXA Northampton's contract logistics operation. Now going to look at the other things that you should consider, or some of the other things that you should consider when shipping a consignment to the UK, starting off with Incoterms. Incoterms simply means international commercial term. To ensure that Incoterms are always current, they are reviewed and updated every 10 years. The last review took place in 2020, which is in line with Brexit. Incoterms help traders by describing the obligations, the costs, and the risks involved in the delivery of goods from sellers to buyers. They determine things like where and when the goods will be delivered, who arranges the transport and pays for the freight, who handles and pays for the insurance, who is responsible for the export and import formalities, and the clearance fees, and also who pays duties and the taxes. Goods packaging, safety and security, an area of freight movement often overlooked, is only usually reviewed by shippers when things go wrong, for example during a theft or a damage to a consignment. Cosmetics are expensive, often tens of thousands of euros worth of product per consignment. It's important that you speak to your chosen incumbent about what they offer to reduce such occurrences. You should also consider insurance here. I'm going to quickly look at some of the things that DAXA do to mitigate these sorts of risks. So this is what a typical line haul trailer looks like after it's been loaded from one of our transit terminals. Please note the use of loading bars here, which create what is effectively an internal shelf to load freight onto. This allows maximum trailer utilization, which is of course more environmentally friendly, and also reduces product damage through crushing. Also notice the use of ullage sacks, which prevents damage to product through abrasion or freight moving whilst in transit. All of our international vehicles transit along predefined routes, only using predetermined truck stops or DAXA branches for overnight stays, which which does reduce significantly the likelihood of theft. All of our international trailers are box trailers, which are more difficult to breach than curtain-sided equipments. I'd like to introduce to you the DAXA retail box. This is specific to DAXA Cosmetics Logistics. Because most cosmetics products are delivered to stores or to specific points of sale, such as shopping malls, outlets, airports, for example, moving a pallet to such locations can be quite difficult. The retail box offers easily handling, low security, protection from water and dust, and also requires less packaging. It's perfect for the safe handling of cosmetics and other beauty products such as fragrances. Finally, for this section, I'd like to mention consignment tracking. If I was an exporter or an importer, I would want to know where my consignment was. In my 14 years of experience in the industry, it's fair to say that all incumbents do offer this, but to varying degrees. In reality, the level of control and accuracy of information in some cases isn't good. At DAXA, we operate our own transport network. All DAXA branches across the world use the same transport management system for air, sea, and road freight consignments. This gives us the unique ability to allow our clients to see where the consignment is within our network at all times. We operate a very straightforward traffic light system, as demonstrated in the slide below, simply meaning that if you have the green light, the freight is being delivered. If it's amber, then there may be a problem, and if it's red, there definitely is a problem. Finally, I want to mention sustainability. This is really important across all industries, but in particular within the cosmetics and the beauty industry. All leading brands invest millions of euros annually in becoming more sustainable. For this reason, to complement this investment, it's important that your supply chain reflects this ethos. It's fair to say that all of the major freight companies are also investing heavily in this field. This is no different to DAXA, where a big area of focus is emission-free collections and emission-free deliveries. So we offer emission-free deliveries in strategic city locations where usually levels of pollution are particularly high. Currently we offer emission-free deliveries in 13 metropolitan regions of Europe, including London. A further 11 locations will be added by the end of this year. The emission-free deliveries are carried out by electric cargo bikes and battery-operated vehicles, such as trucks and vans. Lastly, I'd like to talk about some of our accreditations, which include EcoVadis, SQAS for the movement of hazardous goods, and we also have a B rating by the Carbon Disclosure Project. I'd also like to mention that we use 100% renewable electricity in all of our branches across the world. We have done this since 2022. My presentation, I would like to say thank you all very much for your time. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to give me a call or drop me an email on the contact details on this slide.
Fecha aí quando fecha as coisas e quando termina as coisas, fecha logo.
É normal.
You, Jane? Yeah. Thank you. I'm just can everybody see my screen?
Just coming.
So thank you very much to all our speakers. Incidentally, they are all member companies of the UK Cosmetic Cluster, and we appreciate their time in giving these presentations. I am going to open the Q&A to Mojan and also to Amanda and I believe Olivia from Bloom. I'm just wondering if we do have any questions in the chat. Jill, have you noticed any coming up?
Questions in the chat.
So if there are any questions, please put them in there now. I will perhaps ask each of the speakers to make any additional comments. I think what people are, from my experience, are interested in is how they envisage the UK regulations diverging from the European regulations in the future, and how that might affect what's happening in terms of regulation in the UK. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
Sure. So we do already have some divergence. So although we took the annexes to the regulations when we left in 2020, there obviously have been a lot of changes in the EU since that time. Whilst we have mirrored a lot of those in the UK, it's not an automatic process. So there are some small tweaks that have been made even when the same substances have been placed into the annex. And going forward, there is no guarantee that we are automatically taking any of those changes. So I think the key message there is you must watch both sets of legislation independently, because there is no guarantee they're the same. And that applies not just to cosmetic legislation, obviously it applies to everything, but what we've seen, especially in REACH in the EU, is the microplastics restriction, D4, D5, D6 restrictions, which apply to cosmetics, but are not in the cosmetic legislation, but they are not in UK REACH at this time. So there is quite a difference there with some of the other ingredient restrictions. And going forward, the discussion on PFAS as well is two separate discussions happening in those two territories.
Thank you. Does anybody have any
There's a
further comment?
question in the chat from Bruce. Can you please clarify again if the responsible person for the UK GB market can be also based in Northern Ireland?
Yes, it can be based on Northern Ireland, but bear in mind that if you are in Northern Ireland, you have to follow both regulation EU and UK. So as Amanda mentioned, there are some kind of, divergence in the regulation. For example, the IFRA, that AT allergens has not yet kind of, placed in the UK, but you have that new regulation coming on the market from the UK side. So yes, it can be, but make sure that, you have all of the, regulation covered properly.
Thank you. Was that all? I know there was a question about recordings. I do want to let people know that everybody who's registered for both the previous webinar, part 1, and also this one will receive the link once we get a chance to download the recordings. So you will receive them as soon as we can actually manage to do that. So hopefully that answers that question. Do we have any other questions? I don't think.
In the safety report, how much information do you need from ingredient suppliers?
Morten, do you want to take that one? You're probably better placed.
Very good question, Jill. Well, that safety report, basically we have Annex 1 in both EU and UK regulation that they set up the criteria and, information that have to be in the, safety report. And one of the most important criteria is about ingredient safety. And what you need to have, you need to kind of make sure the ingredients are safe to be for the, certain use and application of the product based on the percentage. However, you also have to make sure that impurity in the ingredients are actually compliant with the regulation. So if your ingredients are in Annex 3, there are certain restriction of the, impurities on ingredient. And in addition to Annex 3 ingredients, there are certain, for example, heavy metal or other impurities that they can impact the safety of the finished product. So a good safety assessor should actually ask you for the SDS of the ingredient and also should ask you for a certificate of, analysis that basically tell the safety assessor what are the impurities in your ingredient. So safety assessment, I think if it is done properly, is a very complex report, but Also, it is necessary to give the confidence to consumer that your product is safe to be placed on the market.
Are there safety information? Is there safety information for ingredients that are like very regularly used in most products? You know, sort of excipient type ingredients, or do you have to provide all your ingredient safety every time?
Well, you have to provide all of your ingredient safety for the certain product that you are manufacturing. And if the ingredients are being checked, it is recommended that you go to your safety assessor and make sure the new ingredient is safe. For example, let's say glycerin. It's a very common ingredient. It is GRAS, it is safe. However, you may have diethylene glycol impurity in your glycerin at the level that it may not be considered as safe. And when you change the source of ingredient, the safety of that very simple ingredient like glycerin may change. So it is very important. Safety assessment is for certain ingredient that they are declared to the safety assessor. And it's not just, okay, any glycerin is safe in your product. So safety is based on the trademark and ingredient that you are used. If you are changing or switching ingredient, definitely you have to kind of, get in touch with your safety assessor and make sure the new supply of the ingredient with the same INCI is still safe to be used.
Thank you. So if you don't have any more questions, and if none of our speakers have any further comments that they want to make, I'd like to say thank you again to all of you for your time and efforts in the presentations, but also thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We are part of a series of webinars being put out by the Global Cosmetics Cluster. The next country will be announced soon. I can't tell you what it is at the moment, but it would be nice if people were interested in letting us know if there is a particular cluster country from the list that is on the website that hasn't done a webinar that you would be interested in, then obviously we will bear that in mind. But as soon as we have the recordings available, we'll share them with you, and thank you for attending and thanks for your time. So bye everyone.